Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Ever thought about, if you move to a totally different country,
Yeah,
like new sights, new sounds,
absolutely.
obviously new foods, you'd think,
Yeah.
your life would change, right? But what if, something inside you changed too? Something you couldn't even see?
Oh, interesting.
What if all the tiny little microbes living in your gut, they just, totally transformed
Wow,
because of, the new environment or your new diet?
that's fascinating.
It's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah.
And that's actually what we're diving into today.
Okay.
We're going to explore how moving to a new country
Yeah.
can affect those microorganisms living in our gut,
Right.
which we call the gut microbiome.
Right. Right.
And more specifically, we're going to look at how those changes in the gut microbiome
Yes.
can actually impact our heart health.
That's really interesting.
So to really understand this, we're going to be looking at a super interesting study from the Amsterdam University Medical Centers, or Amsterdam UMC.
Yeah.
And this study was published in the journal Gut Microbes.
Okay.
We're also going to be looking at the scientific paper,
Okay.
which is titled Gut Microbiota Shift in Ghanaian Individuals Along the Migration Axis, the RODAM-Pros cohort.
Gotcha.
So today, our goal is to really understand how and why our gut microbiome adapts
Yes.
when we move to a new country,
Right.
what the health implications are,
Especially for
our hearts,
Yeah.
and what questions this raises for future research,
Yeah.
and our understanding of well-being.
That's great. So let's get started.
Okay.
What were these scientists trying to figure out with this study?
Yeah, so basically they wanted to know how the types of bacteria in our gut
Right.
change when people move from one country to another.
Okay.
But they weren't just looking at, which bacteria appeared or disappeared.
Yeah.
They wanted to see if those changes
Yeah.
were connected to a higher risk of getting heart disease
Right.
or other conditions that affect our metabolism,
Right.
like diabetes or stroke.
Got it.
So they're really trying to understand this link between where you live,
Yeah.
the bacteria in your gut, and your overall health.
That makes sense. So how did they go about doing this? Who did they study?
Okay, so they studied over 1,100 people
Wow. That's a lot.
with Ghanaian heritage.
Okay.
And what makes the study really interesting
Yeah.
is that they looked at 3 different groups of people
Okay.
in different locations.
Oh, cool.
So they had people living in rural Ghana,
Okay.
people living in urban areas of Ghana,
Okay.
and then Ghanaian people who had migrated to Amsterdam.
Oh, wow. That's a really good comparison.
Yeah, in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So this comparison is a real strength of the study.
Right.
Because they could track these changes
Yeah.
as people moved across different environments.
Okay, cool. So they look at where they lived.
Right.
What else did they look at? Did they gather any other information?
Yeah, so they actually collected a ton of information to make
Okay.
sure everything was consistent.
Okay.
They had every single participant,
Yeah.
no matter where they lived,
Uh,
fill out the exact same questionnaire about their diets.
okay.
So they were really trying to control for the dietary differences
Got it.
between these different groups.
Okay, makes sense.
And then everybody also provided fecal samples.
Okay, so that's to analyze the gut bacteria, right?
Exactly. And they gave blood samples.
Okay,
So the scientists could assess their overall health.
got it.
They were looking at things like blood pressure,
Uh-huh.
diabetes, obesity,
Okay,
and how well their kidneys were functioning.
got it.
So basically, they wanted to see if there were any connections between
Yeah.
the bacteria in the gut
Mm-hmm.
and these risk factors for heart disease.
Right.
So they had a ton of data
Yeah.
from all these different people
Yeah.
in these different locations.
So what did they find? What were some of the big takeaways?
Yeah, so there were some really interesting findings.
Okay.
The first one was
Yeah.
that there was a clear change
Okay.
in the types of bacteria in the gut
Okay.
as people moved from rural Ghana
Okay.
to urban Ghana
Okay.
to Amsterdam.
Oh, wow.
So this was a gradual shift
Okay.
in the microbiome
So it wasn't
as people migrated.
Yeah.
It wasn't just small changes.
yeah.
They actually saw entire groups of bacteria disappear
Wow.
and new ones emerge.
That's crazy.
It's like a whole new ecosystem developing in the gut.
Wow. Were there any specific bacteria that they found that were really prominent in these changes?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
One of the things they found was
Yeah.
a type of bacteria called Prevotellaceae,
Okay.
were like the most abundant
Okay.
in the people living in rural Ghana.
Oh.
And these bacteria are often linked to diets that are high in plants and fiber.
Okay.
But when they looked at the Ghanaian people
Yeah.
living in Amsterdam,
Uh-huh.
the main bacteria had shifted to Lachnospiraceae and Bacteroidaceae.
Oh, wow.
And Lachnospiraceae are really interesting
Oh, yeah.
because they're involved in producing these beneficial substances
Okay.
called short-chain fatty acids.
Got it.
So this shift is like a huge change
Right.
in how the body processes food in the gut.
It's like the gut is adapting to the new types of food.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's favoring different bacteria that can break down the food.
Right.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like the gut is,
Yeah.
it's almost like evolving
Right, exactly.
in response to this new environment.
Were there any other changes in specific bacteria that they noticed?
Yeah, so another interesting one was
Okay.
bacteria called Weissella.
Okay.
And these were actually pretty common in both the rural
Okay.
and urban Ghanaian groups. But they were basically gone
Oh, wow.
in the people living in Amsterdam.
Oh, interesting.
So it suggests that something about the Netherlands, like the environment
Yes.
or the diet,
Right.
doesn't support these bacteria.
Wow.
And then they also saw a decrease
Okay.
in bacteria called Enterobacteriaceae,
Okay.
which includes like E. coli,
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
as people moved from rural Ghana to urban Ghana to Amsterdam.
So it's like a loss and gain
Right.
as people move.
Exactly.
And it's linked to location.
Exactly.
But the study didn't just stop at like identifying these changes, right?
No, it didn't.
They also looked at how these changes were connected to people's health.
Right.
And that's the really important part.
Exactly.
So what did they find there?
They found a link
Okay.
between changes in the microbiome
Yeah.
and the risk of developing heart disease.
Oh.
So people who had lost
Yeah.
certain types of bacteria
Uh-huh.
or gained new ones were more likely to have those risk factors.
Okay. So can you give me like a specific example of that?
Yeah. So they found a group of 13 types of bacteria
Okay.
that tended to disappear
Yeah, I
as
don't-
people migrated.
Yeah.
And the absence of these bacteria
Uh-huh.
was linked to things like
Okay.
higher body mass index, or BMI,
Okay.
higher diastolic blood pressure,
Okay.
which is the bottom number in your blood pressure reading,
Right.
poorer kidney function,
Okay.
and a higher rate of both hypertension and diabetes.
Oh, that's significant.
Yeah.
So it's like those bacteria are somehow helping to protect against heart problems.
Right. It seems like they play a role in maintaining like a healthy metabolism.
Right.
And when they're gone, things start to go a little bit haywire.
Okay, so losing those bacteria is bad. What about the bacteria that emerged in the migrants?
Yeah.
Did they find anything with those?
Yeah, so they also found a group of 6 bacteria
Right.
that tended to emerge or appear.
The microbiomes of the migrants.
Yeah.
And these bacteria were also linked to a worse heart health profile.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like a double whammy.
Right. It's not just losing the good bacteria.
Yeah.
It's also gaining ones that might not be so good
Exactly.
for your heart.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. So what was causing these changes? Like, why were these bacteria shifting in the first place?
Yeah, so the researchers found that the biggest factor was diet.
Okay, that makes sense.
So things like the amount of protein, fat, and salt
Right.
that people were eating
Uh-huh.
had the biggest impact on the types of bacteria in their gut.
Okay.
And the Ghanaian migrants in Amsterdam,
Yeah.
they tended to eat more of these things
Okay.
compared to the people living in Ghana.
Right.
So this dietary shift
Yeah.
is probably the main reason for those changes in the microbiome.
Yeah. It's like different bacteria, like different types of food. Right. So if you change what you're eating,
You're essentially creating a new environment.
right, for different bacteria to thrive.
Right.
It's like changing the menu at a restaurant
Yeah, yeah.
and seeing which customers show up.
Exactly.
Different foods attract different bacteria.
That's a great analogy. So they use diet to analyze the changes.
Yeah.
Did they use any other tools or techniques?
Yeah. So they use this really cool technique
Okay.
called XG-boost machine learning,
Okay.
which is a type of artificial intelligence.
Wow. So AI for gut bacteria.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
That can help identify the specific bacteria
Okay.
that were most different between the locations.
Got it.
And it could also tell them how those bacteria were connected
Okay.
to things like diet, BMI, and age.
Oh, wow.
And these models were super accurate
Okay.
at distinguishing between the different locations.
Wow.
So it really strengthens their findings.
It's like having this really powerful tool to analyze all this data.
Exactly.
pinpoint the key differences. So it sounds like diet was a big part of these microbiome changes.
Yeah.
But was it the only thing?
Well, that's the thing.
Yep.
Diet and those other factors,
Yeah.
like BMI and age, they were definitely important.
Okay.
But they didn't explain all the changes they saw,
Oh, interesting.
which suggests that there are other things at play, too.
Like what?
Like maybe the types of microorganisms
Okay.
in the air and water,
Uh-huh.
differences in sanitation practices,
Okay.
or even lifestyle factors
Right.
that weren't captured in those questionnaires.
Okay.
So there's still a lot we don't know about how all these different things interact.
Right. It highlights how complex the microbiome is
Exactly.
and how it's affected by so many things.
Exactly.
So given all these findings, what are the implications of this research? Why is this important?
So this research really shows us
Okay.
how big of an impact migration can have on our gut health
Right.
and how those changes in the gut microbiome could be part of the reason why.
Okay.
Migrants often have worse health outcomes
Okay, yeah.
compared to people who stay in their home country.
Right.
So when people move, it's not just their external environment that changes.
Yeah.
It's also their internal microbial environment.
Wow. That's crazy.
Right. It's like this whole hidden world inside of us
Yeah.
that's also affected by where we live.
We always hear about how migrants have worse health outcomes.
Yeah.
Like, this is something that's been documented by organizations like the World Health Organization.
Right.
And now this research gives us a possible explanation.
Right.
It's like a missing piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
I remember reading a quote from one of the researchers, Professor Agiamang.
Yeah.
He said, "It is fascinating to learn that when we migrate, we lose some relevant microbes we acquired in our home countries and pick up new microbes in the new countries. And this can influence our health very importantly."
Yeah, that's a really good summary of the study's findings.
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of gut health.
Right.
We're talking about the health of migrant populations.
Exactly. It's not just about socioeconomic factors or access to healthcare.
Right.
It's also about these changes in the microbiome
Right.
that are happening on a microscopic level.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So what are some of the next steps? Like, where does this research lead us?
Well, it opens up some really interesting possibilities
Okay.
for helping migrants stay healthy.
Yeah.
So, for example, we could develop dietary recommendations
Okay.
that are specifically tailored to help people maintain a healthy gut microbiome
Yeah,
when they move to a new country.
that makes sense.
And in the future, we might even see the development of
yeah.
microbiome-based interventions,
Okay.
like probiotics or prebiotics.
Okay.
That could help reduce the risk of heart disease
Gotcha.
in migrants.
And Professor Owusu-Dabo also talked about how important it is
Yeah,
to have researchers from different parts of the world working together to study these issues.
exactly.
So it's like a global effort
Right,
to understand these complex health challenges.
right, because migration is a global phenomenon,
Right.
and it's affecting people all over the world.
So this study is really exciting,
Mm-hmm.
but of course, like any scientific research, there are some limitations.
Right.
What were some of the things that the study couldn't tell us?
Yeah, so one of the main limitations was it was a cross-sectional study,
Okay.
meaning it only looked at people
Yeah.
at one point in time.
Right.
So while it shows a link between migration,
Yeah.
microbiome changes, and heart health,
Yeah.
it can't prove that those microbiome changes
Okay.
actually caused the heart problems.
Okay.
To do that, we would need longitudinal studies,
Okay.
which would follow the same people over time.
Right. So track them as they migrate
Exactly.
and see how their microbiome and their health changes over time.
Exactly.
That would give us much stronger evidence. Were there any other limitations?
Yeah, another limitation is
Yeah.
that there could be other factors
Okay.
that the researchers didn't measure
Uh-huh.
that could be influencing both the diet, the microbiome, and the heart health.
Right.
So these are called confounding factors.
Okay.
And they could include things like differences in living conditions,
Yeah.
sanitation practices,
Wait.
exposure to animals,
Okay.
or even environmental pollution,
Right.
which could all vary between rural Ghana,
Yeah.
urban Ghana,
Yeah.
and Amsterdam.
And that makes it really hard to isolate the effects of migration, right?
It's-
Because all these other things are happening at the same time.
Right.
So it's hard to know what's causing what.
Exactly.
What other limitations were there?
Okay, so another one was that the rural communities in the study,
Okay.
while they were considered rural,
Yeah.
they were still agricultural communities,
Okay.
which means they were probably more urbanized. than some other rural populations
Right?
that have been studied.
Yeah.
So their baseline microbiome might have already reflected
Okay.
some changes related to diet and lifestyle.
Right, so they weren't like a completely pristine population that
Yeah.
had never been exposed to modern ways of life.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. And lastly, did they look at how these microbiome changes might be affecting other aspects of health?
So this study was really focused on heart health,
Okay.
and it didn't really look at how these changes might be affecting other things like the immune system
Okay,
or gut health.
right.
So those are definitely areas for future research.
So it's like they opened up a door to a whole new area of study.
Exactly.
That's really exciting. So what did the experts have to say about these findings?
Well, Dr. Verhaar, who was the lead author of the study,
Yeah.
she emphasized that the research really clearly shows how much the microbiome changes
Okay.
with migration. And she also pointed out that the study was designed to overcome some limitations of previous research,
Okay.
like by using the same dietary questionnaires in all the locations.
That's good. So they were really careful
Right,
to make sure the data was reliable.
right.
What about the other researchers? What were their thoughts?
So Professor Agumeng,
Yeah.
we already talked about his thought
Right.
about how we lose some microbes
Yeah.
and gain others
Yeah.
when we migrate.
And that this can affect our health.
Right.
What about Professor Olusudamba? What did he have to say?
He said that the study provides really valuable insights
Okay.
into how migration changes
Yeah.
the bacteria in our gut and our health.
Okay.
And he also talked about the need for
Yeah.
more international research partnerships
Okay.
to really address these global health challenges
Right.
and build upon the study's findings.
So there seems to be agreement that this research is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And one more thing that's worth noting.
Yeah.
The types of microbial shifts they found were more diverse than what's usually seen in studies of westernization.
Right,
So it's not just about adopting a Western diet.
right.
It's about the specific context of migration
Exactly.
and urbanization
Exactly.
in a country like Ghana.
Right. It's
Yeah.
a much more complex picture
Yeah.
than we previously thought.
So this has been a really fascinating deep dive
Yeah, it has.
into the world of our gut microbiome
Right.
and how it changes when we move to a new country.
Right. And how interconnected our bodies are
Absolutely.
with our environment.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think it's really important for people to think about the connection
Yeah.
between their surroundings, their diet, and these microbes living inside them,
Right.
especially if they've experienced a major change in their diet or environment,
Right.
whether it's through migration or something else.
It's a good reminder that our gut health is influenced by so many factors.
Yeah.
And those factors can change dramatically when we move to a new place.
Right.
It really makes you think about how even small changes in our diet
Yeah.
could be having a big impact on our gut microbiome
Right.
and our overall health.
And maybe if we understand how these changes happen during migration,
Yeah.
we can find ways to improve the health of everyone,
Right.
no matter where they live.
Exactly. By focusing on that link between diet,
Yeah.
gut bacteria,
Yeah.
and heart health,
Right.
we might be able to find new ways to keep our hearts healthy
That's a great point.
for everyone.
Food for thought.
It is.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.